All right, Roland. It's Freedom Phil. Like and subscribe. What's today's topic? I want to talk about an individual that inspired me. There's a handful of them, and some people might be a little surprised by who some of them were. I'll talk about this individual. The name Freedom Phil that I go by, I didn't come up with this originally. I go with it because I just thought it was funny. By the time I was using this name, well, we'll talk about that part later, perhaps. You know, I look back at it, and a lot of people might assume that my name has to do with my father, who was also named Phil, ironically. No. And I have nothing against my old man, but this guy was more in my life. And not hugely in my life, but just enough of an inspiration. Such a eccentric, gregarious guy who just did what he wanted. To some degree, one might argue, he was kind of childish at times. But what he did when he worked with metal, welding, building, whatever he wanted to build, was incredible. And he just did things. And he would look at the world and go, well, if I can do this way, why should I have to do it your way? Which is the anti-conformist in production. Actually a productive person is not just the system, man. Yeah. I rented that land for 4 years from him for $100 a month. I always made sure to bring him a Chris Benjamin a little early before the end of the month. That way he's already got his money. He'd be off to the bar. He was the type of guy that would work. He would go to coffee in the morning. Him and all his buddies, loggers, welders, machinists. He was the welder guy, to be honest. And then some of these guys were dirt guys, where they, did excavating. And that old song from the beginning of the Dukes that has it, just a good old boy. He was kind of like that. He wasn't I'm not talking Southern racism or anything like that. He was just, he had his buddies and he had his way of doing things. Everybody around town that lived there long enough knew who he was. Either knew him or knew who he was. Not in necessarily a super positive way, bad way or anything. Just if you live in a town long enough, oh yeah, I went to high school with that person. Or I worked with him on some project. How I knew him was my buddy, well, that was his dad. And he would just come up with an idea of how to build something. He'd already have it kind of let it roll around in the mind. I remember one time he had his welding unit, and it used to run off a Dodge diesel. Not diesel, but a gas pusher. So it'd use a ton of fuel. And his welding unit, basically, the back end of it, he had a full-size arc welder, a crane for moving stuff, and some other, air compressor tools. And this is back when this stuff wasn't compressed the way it is now. Things have gotten a lot better. I mean, the type of operation he had, only the pros these days would have something like that. And it would be a lot better looking than what he had. I'm not talking shit. But he was doing it way back then. Some guys had used wire feed, and he's like, no, you want a real weld, you want arc. You want straight up stick welding, man. He was really good at it too. One time, me and his son stole that bottle too. He got a welding trophy that was basically this bourbon from in the 80s or something. He won championship for the state. I don't know if he ever figured out. Basically, that was the smoothest bourbon I've ever had. I've never had anything better as far as bourbons ever went. I mean, that was ridiculous. It was ridiculously good when he won that trophy. And it was stupidly good down the road. And then his son grabbed it just so he could go party with his buddies. I'll go some alcohol. Fucking pleb. I said, hey, can I have another drink? Well, I'm saving this from my other friends. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're just going to go piss away your dad's welding trophy on some douchebags that'll forget about it once they pee in the morning. I'm like, nice, man. Are you even going to bother to refill it? Yeah, I'll refill it with something. He won't know. He probably never did, actually, to tell you the truth. To tell you the truth, I'm probably more like Freedom Phil than his son. His son's kind of like him, but not the same. There's some mistakes that Phil made over the years, but he got this he took half a beer truck, cut it in half, and then had the back end of his welding unit, and he just built new frame rails, did all this, and he made it. He just built the fucking thing. He built it, put it together. Now he's like, then he built a new drive line from scratch, and it ran just fine. That was his new deal. It was inspiring, you know. You watch a guy just do things. And another time, he got into the car business for not really seriously. He had a trailer license. That's how he could get away. That's how he would go to the police auctions over in Puget Sound. And he basically would go over there. He'd go out late at night. He'd bring a load of scrap when all the scales were closed. It'd be vastly overloaded. And then he'd go over there, maybe even have a little trailer behind him. He'd go sell the scrap and then go buy 2 or 3, derelict cars at the police auction. They're actually decent okay vehicles is what I should say. Then have one of his other welder guys that worked for him, mechanic/welder, put them back together, I bought a number of vehicles on. That's where I got the Viking Death Truck. They called it the taco van. It was a big brown van. I called it the bear van, but they called it the taco van. They're like, why the taco van? Because a bunch of Mexicans were looking to buy it. It was a 1-ton, probably brush pickers, so they called it the taco van. But I actually got that Grabber Maverick from him too. And some of the things I got from him were, I don't know why I bought them. Maybe I was a bit more trusting. But yeah, there was not to say there weren't times the guy was a fucking asshole. He was. But, he'd work hard today and then go out and go to the bar. He knew where every happy hour was at every place, so he'd make some money. I remember this one time he was working on these logging bunks and his buddy was waiting for him. That's what he did. That was his real specialty, because when other people would build bunks, they build them this standard way that was lighter by only how many pounds, but they were weaker. He would build them. He did this thing where he'd build, and he said, if you look, the company that I stopped working for back in the 80s started copying my technique because they were that much better. And he was right. They did. What he did is he did things at a different angle, geometry, all this stuff, and it increased the strength of these units vastly. And he used a slightly thick, I got him talking about it. He's like, well, I use these U-bolts that are this much bigger. And yeah, they weigh a little bit more, but they're this much stronger. And I add this much more metal here, which weighs almost nothing. And with these units, I built this one back in, let's just say 86 or whenever. I don't know when he built it. And it's still rolling. It's 2000. This must have been back in the early 2000s, like 2002. It's still proudly running down the road. No problems, no issues. He did it his way. And if he saw a problem, he would just build a solution. And this other time, he built this tow truck. He had a 70s GMC front end, huge motor, gas pusher, huge motor for that. And then and it was the type of that GMC model that had instead of having one light that switched high beam, low beam, it had 4 lights on the front. It was that one. And he cut the back end off. And then he redid the frame rails on that as well. Built the frame. And then he welded the whole back end. He built his own thing for the towing unit. He's really proud. He was like, I've been looking for these Holmes winches, or that's all I remember about him. They were Holmes or something like that. And he's like, these are the ones. And he built that, and he built something on the front of that. And I told him one time, you should patent that. That's a great idea. He's like, I don't want to be known for the water bumper. Like, water bumper? He could tow heavier loads because, when something gets too heavy, it's too heavy on for the weight for the vehicle. And then he just filled up the bumper, this tank on the front, full of water. And then basically, he even had a little spigot on it. He'd tow something. And this all worked out well. He towed tons. He used to go over to the auto auctions and sometimes take that over, hit up the casino, because they'd have the $5 breakfast. He's like, that's a good breakfast for $5, And then basically, he was just a guy that did his things his way. And what one of the things that I would say about him was, there was this time where he was all pissed off. The cops pulled him over and busted him. But they didn't really bust him. They said, we don't want to catch you moving this type of heavy weight again. He had his trailer. They're like, why can't I? It's moving just fine. He's like, you got to have air to move air. and he was moving a school bus. Now, if it had been hydraulic, one of the super old buses, because that's the way the super old ones were, he could have moved it legally. But people were like, how can you move it with that? The water bumper allowed him to have enough weight on the front where it didn't lift him up. But yeah, like he was all peeved about that. I remember that. Yeah, he was a wild guy, fun, kind of an asshole at times. I mean, I'm just being honest. I'm not gonna say just good things about a guy. I mean, yeah, there were times he was kind of a shyster a few times here and there too. But if you grew up in the town that I grew up, you know, you would get it. Like the problem with the town where I was from is that after the logging crash happened in the late 80s, early 90s, things just got desperate. You know, as far as working, the people that previously were working building this for logging or this machinist, this or that, jobs just weren't there. Things dried up. All by the stroke of a government pen, by the way. Yeah, a lot of people, that's one reason that I don't agree with a lot of environmentalists. I believe in conservation, for instance. Yeah, we need, if you want to have hunting and fishing in the future, or even just animals to look at, bird watching, whatever, nature watching, then you need to save some of it. But if you go to an area and you shut down all the industry, and look at us, we're so important, we chained ourselves to trees and tree spike. By the way, tree spikes, when they're trying to cut them down and they don't know they're there, years later, these trees, maybe they're cutting a tree down, and that spike hits the chain breaks and it fucking kills a guy. So by the way, hippies, fuck you. Oh, we're saving the forest. No, you weren't. You were just a bunch of fucking asshole rich yuppies. Back then we called them yuppies. Neo-hippie yuppie fucks. Somewhere between a rich yuppie and, like, we're going to college. And they go out there and they protest and they get with the tribes too. But then after they're done, hey, where's the tribe? Left high and dry. You're still living in poverty and all that shit. After the people, we saved the trees. We saved the something. By the way, out here in the wasteland, same shit. And I often think a lot of times when they do that crap, they're really doing it. The government knows there's something valuable under the land or some sort of investment they want to do with it, like some sort of building thing. Not today, 10, 20, 30 years in the future. 30 years. Legacy type of planning. And that way, once they've kicked out off all the people, off the land, then there's nobody that really has any real claim to it. There's no cultural claim to it. Just like when they, make ammunition ridiculously expensive to the point where, people don't go out and teach their kids how to fire. Take out, remember when .22 ammo was ridiculously expensive? I do. It's about changing the culture. We grew up where I was at in a place that was once prosperous and then was struggling for 2 decades, actually 3, since the 80s to today, late 80s to today. And there's been highs and lows, but it never recovered from what it was. So I do understand part of the reason he was the way that he was. So you had to think about it, But yeah, he just kind of did what he wanted, built what he wanted. If he had a problem, he would just think of a solution. And I see that being murdered every day today. Like, people think for themselves, or they don't just do what they're told 24/7, like the government, and by the way, the government, so-called we the people, how often is that just a bunch of people establishing themselves in places of power to tell you what to do? Like, I remember he had some, there was, by the way, I told him he was fucking up when he did this. There was this guy, I'll use his name, George. If anybody who's watching this that knows me knows who I'm talking about. The Smiley George. George was a fucking sack of shit. I hope George gets a slow, deadly form of cancer and dies a horrific death. That's horrible. Yeah, fuck George. What did George do? I remember telling my buddy, I told Phil, I said, that guy's out today taking photos of your junkyard. Oh, he's doing an art piece. He's doing something, putting on art, like Americans at Work. I told him that's that guy. I looked at him and said, that guy's a rich kind of fucking environmentalist type, Phil. Oh, George is fine. You're just being paranoid. Yeah, Phil, who was right? George was the beginning of a lot of problems for my buddy. Not to say he didn't cause some of it. Like when they said you need to build a fence and he looked into the legal laws, he was legal, he was correct. He just had to build a dirt berm. when he was having his little car sales thing on the highway there, which was on basically his property. You have to build it this far back. If you're going to have people coming in and out of this property, you have to build, one of those things where you have a middle lane. They were literally just harassing him because they didn't like him. They didn't like his junkyard. They didn't like his welding yard, his junkyard. He took 4 shipping containers, and then he got this roof from a guy in pieces, this metal roof from a factory. And he put it back together, and he had this huge roof on. He was going to build these big doors on. That was going to be his shop, built his way. Instead of going out and buying a shop kit, and dealing with all the bullshit permits, he's like, well, this isn't a permanent structure. They're like, it's welded together, Phil. But like, they did everything in their power to fuck with that guy. You got to have a fence around this property. And I think part of the reason he had problems is because the neighbors, one lot between, there was an old lady that lived with her cow and her cats and her chickens right between him and the other junkyard. And I think maybe they might have had a problem with it. Like, well, why do we have to have this giant junkyard or fence and all this stuff? And they were running by the book. And there was just a good old boy, my buddy, Freedom Phil. There was Freedom Phil doing what he was doing. So they hassled him. So he built these big dirt berms because that legally counted as a fence. And that pissed the county off. And basically, at that point, they were out for him. But that George guy showed up one day, taking photos. And I said, dude, don't let him do that. You're being paranoid. Okay. Down the road, it turned out that George was collecting evidence to present to the county to shut my buddy down. Smiling George. One of those airy-fairy, like, hippie fuckers. He was in the 60s. He was a fucking hippie. And I've got a problem with all hippies. I just think there's a lot of you. Like, these kind of elitist, rich, like, poor version of rich elite hippie circles. Fuck those people. We know what's good for you. By the way, that's part of the reason in the 90s, the reason the Democrats lost to George Bush. We know what's good for you. Nobody wants to hear that shit. Nobody wants to hear, and even when I talk about retirement by 30, I'm just giving you guys suggestions. I'm not telling you what you got to do, but I'm telling you that what you're doing ain't working. But you get these rich elite George, what was his name? Al Gore types, Clintons. We know what's better for you. You're not intelligent. We're college educated. Yeah, by the way, the same people that sold you all the fake environmentalist shit. Like, I do believe that there is some global warming. There is some, as they notice how they change it from global warming, Captain Planet, to climate change. All the doom and like by this year we were all supposed to be deep underwater, right? Yeah. And by the way, do you know it's like Adam Carolla said the other day. Funny how these people that told us we were all going to be underwater, but do you know what the most expensive property after the fires was down there in LA? Oh, it turns out that beach property there, that's worth how many millions more than the property just up the hill? The property up the hill is safe. He said, and he was saying the highway out there, PCH or whatever it's called. He's like, I think what is that, Pacific Coast Highway? He's like, it's always been there. You would think PCH would be covered in waves by now, but it's not. Remember when Al Gore and all these other famous people, they all ride jets. They all do this shit, Remember when he bought that, like, was it Obama or Al Gore that bought this huge beachfront property? And when we got called out about it, they're like, well, how much do you really believe in this? You bought this property. He's like, well, I'm not only going to be alive so long. Trying to write it off as like, by the time I'll be dead by the time the climate change happens. Fuck you. Bunch of lying sacks of shit, hippie-ass sacks of shit. Zero growth people, by the way. By the way, the Freedom Phil was definitely a conservative. You go to the shop and Rush Limbaugh be playing on the local radio station. Yeah. I just look back at it, and that George guy, basically, when he got all those photos, he used that as evidence. Him and his buddies, to get the local commissioners to hassle my buddy year after year. They're always trying to nail him for something. Because they didn't like how his junkyard, it was a scrap yard, welding yard. He had some old cars there. He pulled out the batteries. He drained out the tanks. A lot of tanks got holes in them just because of that fucking bull. A lot of perfectly good tanks that could have been salvaged for somebody else's project back. And this is back before it became ridiculously easy to produce these tanks. I'm still waiting to hear if anybody ever comes up with an easy way to make a Galaxy windshield. You know, like some way we can do a CNC machine with glass. These people fucking made his life I wouldn't say a living hell. They were a constant fucking irritant. Down the road, eventually, I think what kind of did him in, he was pulling out. He didn't die from this, but he's pulling his vehicle out onto the road, and some guy with a Tundra had an overweight load on his trailer. The Tundra wasn't weighted to even pull that trailer. The trailer brakes weren't even working on that electric trailer. The guy had like one of those Bobcat excavators, and it wasn't really weighted, at least everything I heard. And yeah, it was his fault for backing out onto the highway, because that was right where his property was, and that caused a huge issue. Now, mind you, my buddy, because he had been hassled by these people, because these inspectors would always try to get onto his property, and he'd run them off. Eventually, the judge, that corrupt judge, drug him into court and threw him into jail for like a week or two. Because you're not gonna, just so the inspectors could go out there and hassle his property. And you know, I wanted to explain something. It wasn't like he bought like, you know, rural agriculture, residential property. He bought heavy industrial, not commercial, heavy industrial with light commercial, so you could sell things there. Heavy industrial property. Do you understand? Everything he was doing there, that lot was approved to do. But because of a bunch of HOA, city council type of Karens, they were hassling him to the very end. And when he had that wreck, at that point, when the judge was like, well, you got to come in, he had a court case because this guy was suing him. And it was, honestly, that wreck was his fault. This is the dumbest thing he did. He didn't show. He was like, I'm not going to court. That judge has it out for me. That judge has put me in jail 2 times because I'm fighting against these people trying to shut down my operation. Dumbest thing he did. He should have shown up to court. I don't know if he had the money to lawyer up or not. But that's why they won the court case, which means they pretty much won everything. Kind of fucked his kids out of some property here and there. I remember my buddy saying, yeah, because my dad, that situation, I basically, everything that he'd worked on that would have been me and my sister's legacy after he passed is now up in smoke. Every once in a while when I'm back in town, I'll see something. It's rare, but I see someone that has some of his equipment, some of his stuff, some of it, people that knew him came in there and got it. The people were protecting his property after he died. It was tied up for a number of years there. He was 60-something, or at least he was 60, I believe. And he's having heart problems. He was always one of those, for as much as he was all into natural medicine. Because I remember he told me he had a heart murmur a long time ago at the county fair, and they told him, well, you can't pick up anything over 15 pounds. He's like, some of my hammers I work with, because, big sledges and stuff, working on equipment, way more than that. And so he went to natural medicine. This worked good for him for a number of years. But then he started having some heart issues. And mind you, he was a bacon and egg style guy. Cafe, greasy spoon type of dude. Drink today. I mean, his brother had died, I think, a year or two before that. Just a couple of years older than when he passed. But I don't doubt for a minute, and let me show you something just here for a second. Look at that. We got a little ground squirrel trying to figure out what's going on with this weird device. I smell cornbread. Where's the food? As far as my dog isn't going crazy. He's a cute little fucker. They don't really... Part of the reason I keep the dog out the way I do like this is because then they don't get too bold to get too close to the van where the food is. Anyhow, back to the story. Yeah, I mean, Freedom Phil, he did it his way. And I remember when he went to the doctor, I remember the story I heard was he was in there in the cafeteria eating food. And he was about to set down his tray, and he had some heart problem. He set down his tray, and he just dropped dead right there. I don't doubt for a minute that if it hadn't been for all the stress the government was putting on him over the years, the court case, then that was his fault. Even if the judge hated you, have to stand up to court, and if the judge violated your rights, and then here's where it comes in. Back then, it wasn't like people, all these civil rights violation lawyers that personally make that their thing. That wasn't such a big thing back then. Now it's huge. I don't doubt for a minute he would have lived a lot longer if he hadn't been hassled all the fucking time by the system, the state, and everything. That level of ingenuity that he had, don't wait for someone to, tell you what you can buy, what you can build, what you can do. He just did it. I know that's part of me. I'm more like him than his own son. His son's a great guy. But, we had a disagreement a while ago, but that had a lot to do with, I just got sick and tired of, she makes me so unhappy, blur, blur, blur. And I'm like, well, then leave her. And then he finally gets the nuts up to leave this lady. And then he's like, I can't live without her. I'm like, I'm done. Eventually, I'm just like, well, one or the other, dude, figure it out. And then also, one thing I couldn't care for is that the guy was a fake Christian. He was my buddy, but he was a fake Christian. He still is. He's the type of guy to be out there talking about, I believe in God. Really? Really? Do you go to church? No, but I believe. I mean, do you are you still married to your first wife? No. Oh, you got your girlfriend here, but you won't marry her? No, well, because I did marriage once. Don't get me wrong. I'm not telling the guy to get married, but it was and then the other thing was, it's okay, but you want to have a side piece. You want to have a mistress. You're not a Christian. Shut the fuck up. I that type of level of hypocrisy. I take religion. I'm not a religious person, but I do take it kind of seriously because these are the people telling you how to live your fucking life. And if you're going to claim you're part of this organization, you better live up to it. Otherwise, get fucked. But yeah, his dad was a rare bird. He was eccentric. Sometimes he was a scammer. He was a hustler. He's a great guy. He had to think about things. But he was a product of his time, his era. He was a part of a dying breed of man where basically, people used to, back when America didn't hate itself. He was from that era. Back when, and he grew up back when the logging industry was king. There was a future there. He saw the golden age, the end of he was probably a child in the golden age. And then the falling from the golden age to eventually where they signed that agreement and destroyed the logging industry up where I was at. And that's part of the reason down here in the wasteland, when I hear about the shit when they're hassling ranchers and stuff, I don't know if you've noticed here, let me take a video of it. This place is a pretty desolate area. There ain't much going on out here. A few cows out here chomping on some brush isn't the end of the fucking world. But I saw all that shit happen where I grew up, and he was an inspiration to me. You got a problem, just think of a solution, build a solution. And if you think about Silicon Valley for a second, all those guys that couldn't afford rent down there, it sounded the same. These guys had tech skills, engineering skills, electrical engineers and stuff, and that's where you got a lot of your good solar tech today. Your Jackeries, your Blue Eddies, all that stuff. People basically just building stuff. Because they couldn't afford rent, so they just get a Sprinter van and build something, or an RV. Meanwhile, they're working at someplace like Google. By the way, I don't understand why some of these companies just didn't build, one of those parking garages where, you could have a gym there and all that, to where you could get your shower, you get your stuff, and you just use your van to sleep in. That would have worked out so much better for a lot of those. And this same thing I've said in these cities, they need to build bachelor apartments. They need to build a monastery monk type of thing, not like you're religious or anything, but storage unit sized room where you got a bed, you got the basics, and then you got a public area for cooking, and you got like a gym for working out and showering, and then you can go to work and make your fucking money. Something affordable, not where you're going to have a bunch of bums living. You have to prove you're making progress in your life. But yeah, I mean, I think about it. Back to Phil. That he was a guy that was just doing his thing and motivated. And I kind of do the same thing to some degree. Like, I myself don't really fit into this whole, live in a house, do this, do that. I remember too, by the way, after his kids were done being raised, he just sold his house. He was like, I don't need this anymore. I raised my kids. He sold that off. And he just kind of lived where he had like this big transit van. Not transit van. It wasn't a van. You know those mass transit, disabled vans where they're big. They're the big ones. He had one of those, and it was cool. He even got one of those like mini sized ones too. And he actually set that up. He was doing van life before it was a thing. But yeah, he was an original. We're in a world full of people that I'd honestly say are carbon copies of the next person. Like, bot, go to school, bot, wear clothes, bot, go to high school, get car, bop, beep, bop, boop, bop, trade school or college. And most people were told, trade school, you're a loser. Shit, I knew a lot of guys that went to the trades and did great. No, he was doing his own thing, his own way. And in my opinion, that is really what America was supposed to be about. As long as you're not harming anybody else, like, you should be able to be. Like, and that's the thing about it. When you start to notice how much it seems like everybody else has an axe to grind with you being a free person, you start to realize you're not free. You're not free. You're a farm animal. Go out, buy a house, 30-year mortgage. Now they're talking about 50-year mortgages. Like, why even fucking bother at that point? God, you can go and save enough cash to go to the Midwest and pay cash for a house. Less than 1 year. Fuck. But yeah, most people that I've ever met, and I'm not saying they're bad people, they just are what they are. I don't look at a dairy cow. And by the way, I'm going to say a lot of you, male, female, a lot of you are fucking steers. You just go with whatever you're told to do. You may not think that. You may have different clothing, different fashions, but you all do the same fucking thing. In a world where that was becoming more and more normal and we were killing off the original individual, the original man and woman, the true Americans, he was part of a dying breed. But now, I myself, like, I'm more of a nomad than he ever was. But I mean, he had kids and all that stuff. Yeah, now you look at the generified livestock that we call people. And it's just, he is such a far cry from that. You're like, it's like looking at a whole different era of humans. But yeah, for good or bad, there were some things. He was times I wasn't happy with him, but for the most part, I draw a lot of my inspiration from Phil. There's a handful of other people I could say I draw inspiration from as well. But I've said enough on this topic for now. This is Freedom Phil. Same name as him. Wasn't even my dad. Freedom Phil, like and subscribe, take it easy, and always remember, turn up the video speed. Why? Because if I upload this, why not watch it faster? Shouldn't have to change the time that people speak. Make things go faster, stronger. Peace.